I think seeing what you see on the screen, you probably think that I brought a gift for you. I'm sorry, unfortunately not. What you see on the screen is what most of us think of a gift. When someone tells us about a gift, we either think it's a nice cell phone, or it's a very good perfume, or probably a watch. But unfortunately, not in the case of Narin. And I'm going to talk about her story for a while today because it's a really important and interesting story. And it helps illustrate the point that I'm trying to make in this story. Narin was just a very typical village girl, the kind of girl that you find in any village all over Iraq. And she used to live in Sinjar area, which is in western Nineveh. It's a place which is as old as history itself is, and people have lived there for thousands of years. She had a very quiet life. She would wake up in the morning every day. She would tend to some of the mundane household tasks, and she would help her parents, who are very old, in carrying out whatever routine task they would do every day. And unfortunately, she did not have much education because her parents, again, were old and they needed her help. And it was all very fine for her. Everything was peaceful. It was not probably great, but she had a life that was peaceful, and she was surrounded by people who cared about her and who loved her. But that didn't last, unfortunately. When I met her just a few weeks ago, the moment she entered the room, I didn't know what I should expect. She entered the room, and there she was, a woman, a young girl who still looked very much visibly traumatized and very much still under the effect of what she had gone through. And then she told me how basically she ended up in the tragic situation that she did. It was supposed to be just one more quiet and ordinary morning for a quiet person, a quiet family like hers. They woke up in the morning, and early in the morning they get a call from some of the friends that the fighters from the Islamic State of Iraq and Sham, ISS, were basically arriving in their area. Of course, everyone was very much terrified there. They belong to the Yazidi community, which practices a very ancient Mesopotamian faith. And seeing the track record of that particular group, they knew that they could not really be fine if those people got to them. So they immediately set out and decided to move as far as they could, and they headed toward Mount Sinjar, which I'm sure a lot of you must have heard about the story that happened to the people from Sinjar on the news. On the way to Mount Sinjar, somewhere between their village and the mountain, unfortunately for her and the other people with her, they get surrounded by a number of vehicles and fighters from ISS, and they were separated into several different groups. The young women and girls were put in one group. The younger and capable men were separated, and also the older people. The younger men were later killed, and I'm sure you must have heard about their story. And Narin and a group of other women that were with her, young women, they were all taken away. Of course, hearing about such kind of stories, we all hope that these are very isolated cases, very rare cases. But given the circumstances, the extraordinary circumstances that the country is going through, her tragedy is not unique. And many other people unfortunately have ended up having the same fate in her community. Over 1,000 women are believed to be missing, and they are in ISIS captivity somewhere in Iraq or in Syria. The stories of people like Narin are the stories of ordinary people, people just like you and me, people who have ambitions, who have dreams in life, and all they want is to have a peaceful life. But unfortunately, they are forced to go through extraordinary circumstances and conditions which they do not really have any role in making and in creating. And as a result of that, you end up with extraordinary people. The term extraordinary people is not necessarily a positive one. A lot of these people who go through such extraordinary conditions unfortunately end up losing their lives or being really damaged very heavily by their experiences. The kind of extraordinary circumstances that we have had in Iraq over the past several decades really have disrupted the lives of so many people, and unfortunately for many of them not in a very good way. According to the figures from the United Nations, there is around 2 million internally displaced Iraqis, and around 90,000 people are believed to have died as a result of the conflict between the years 2004 to 2009. And that's just a very small, limited number for that period of time. And over 2 million people, 2.2 million Iraqis were believed to be refugees outside of the country in the year 2007. These people really have become victims of conditions that they do not necessarily even believe in, the kind of factors that have led to these conditions for them. In the case of Narin, after she was kidnapped in Sinjar, she was taken to a number of different places, including Tal Afar and then to Ba'aj and finally to Mosul, where she, alongside dozens of other young girls and women, were kept in captivity for a number of days. They were being insulted regularly, and they were being asked to convert and give up their religion. And of course, many of these people did not give up their religion, including Narin. When I, at the beginning, talked about the idea of gift, you probably wondered what was the connection between the kind of gifts that I displayed and the story of Narin. She was, unfortunately, along with a very close friend of hers, donated as gifts to a couple of senior ISIS leaders, local leaders, and they were transferred to Fallujah at the end, where they stayed for almost a week. They were in a house surrounded by three guys, by three men, and hopefully and fortunately for them, they were not the kind of people who gave up. They always maintained their hope that they could actually do something to end the tragic situation that they were put in. And finally, after a week in captivity, after none of the men was at the house any longer, they managed to break the doors and get out of the house. I'm not going to go into every single detail of the story, and you can read the story online in English and in Arabic too. So they managed to get away. They had a friend of a friend in Fallujah who was a very courageous man who risked his own life to get these women out of Fallujah. So with the help of that benevolent man, they managed to get to Baghdad. And in Baghdad, they also were met by friends and relatives who managed to make 2 fake IDs for them and get them on a plane, and then they flew to Erbil and from there to Rudaw, where they reunited with their family. The stories of these people, of course, are not unique. A lot of people have gone through such stories, but unfortunately many of them do not survive it. It is really the story of Narin and her friend is a story of the survival of human hope, of endurance, and of one not losing their faith in themselves, and the fact that they probably can get out of the miserable conditions that are forced upon them. As a journalist, over a number of years, I've met a lot of different people with some of them really very heart-wrenching and sad stories. For example, the story of one woman from Mosul who told me that after her son was kidnapped and they were asked to pay a huge ransom, which they did, but finally all she was handed over to was the headless body of her son. Or the story of a doctor in Baghdad who had her daughter kidnapped, and at the end they had to flee and run away. Again, they paid the ransom, but they never saw the doctor, and they were basically so traumatized and affected by the story and felt that it was no longer safe for them, so they decided to leave. Or the story of a woman from Kirkuk who lost 7 members of her family in the 80s during the Anfal campaign. What is really important for journalists like us is that we should try to report and talk about the stories of real people, real individuals. Unfortunately, one of the things that we end up doing a lot in Iraq as journalists is that we tend to give out and throw out numbers and official statements more often than we actually tend to go out and meet the real people who are affected by these situations. It's not about numbers. I've done a lot of stories over the course of the past 8 or 9 years, and for none of the stories I've got such a really huge interest and feedback like Narin's. Why? I could have definitely carried her story as part of the many other stories, similar stories that were happening in this country within a story filled with numbers, and I could have buried her story. But it's really important for journalists, if we want to really make have an effect, have an impact, it's really important that we show the real faces, we talk about the real people, and it is ultimately these people that we all can identify with. We as journalists have a lot of power, and we must be very careful in how we treat that power. The screens and the newspaper pages, the websites are blank before we put the story there. So it's really up to us what we do, what kind of stories we cover, how we cover, and what kind of people we let in our stories. And by having some of these stories heard, by having the voices of some of these people heard, we definitely end up having some impact on how we perceive ourselves as a people and how people look at their situations, and might, these kind of real stories focusing on real people might eventually motivate people to really to change, to act differently. In the country that is Iraq, we have a very rich heritage, historical heritage, from the Mesopotamian era all the way up to the modern age. And it's a land of very extraordinary accomplishments by very extraordinary people. And for us to be able to carry on, we must carry on that spirit of being extraordinary in a positive way and be the creator of extraordinarily positive stories. Thank you.